Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard the cry on account of their taskmakers. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on the mountain.
Let us pray. Holy God, we thank you for bringing us into this space. We ask that you would be with us always, particularly in this time. God, we ask that you would open our eyes, ears, hearts, and our minds, that you would make the soil of our souls good, fertile ground for the planting of your word. And we ask, O God, that with time intending, that word might grow within us to bear good fruit for your kingdom. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Yesterday at about 5 p.m., I was in extraordinary discomfort. In fact, I was in quite a bit of pain. My heart rate was about 180, which is redlining it for me. My breathing was extremely labored. I had a hard time catching my breath. I had sweat pouring down both sides of my face, and every joint and muscle in my body hurt. And yet, even though I was in all of that pain and discomfort, I didn't call an ambulance. I didn't get in the car and drive myself to the doctor or the hospital. And I didn't ask anyone for help, even though there were about 15 other people all around me. And the reason is because I, like those other 15 people around me, were in the midst of a very strenuous workout. In other words, we were all exercising. And so I was going through all of this discomfort, but I was doing it to myself. And I even remember I had the presence of mind to stop and reflect at that moment and think to myself, every voice in my head is crying out for me to stop. This is extremely uncomfortable. It's pain, it's suffering, and it's not like it's any different kind of suffering just because I'm exercising. This is pain that I would be feeling in any context, and yet because I'm doing it to myself, I'm pushing through it. Isn't that strange? I thought to myself, if I was at home and I was going through even a fraction of this discomfort and pain, I would absolutely be calling the hospital because I would know that something is wrong, but it's different because I know what I'm doing and I'm putting myself through it. Why in the world does anyone do that? Why in the world would I put myself through that much real discomfort, suffering, and pain on purpose? Well, there's a lot of ways I could answer that question. The way I'd like to answer that question this morning is by telling you a little story. It goes back to 2016. So January of 2016, I was on a cruise ship with my family. It was my dad, stepmom, sister, her family, my wife, my kids. We were all there together, my brother. And my dad had challenged me to go work out with him one day in the gym. And I said, sure, that sounds great. Now here's the thing. I was thinking to myself, this will probably be the first time that I run circles around my old man in the gym. And I was kind of feeling good about that. I thought, I'm 36 years old, he's 64. I thought I was in great shape because I, ran a lot. I was a long distance runner. I would do marathons, mini marathons. It was nothing for me to get up and run 7 to 10 miles any afternoon. Sometimes I'd do 30 or 40 miles in a week. So I thought of myself in good shape, the prime of my life. My dad is 64 years old. 26 and a half years older than me, and he had just gotten off of this exercise restriction after a surgery. So he'd had a surgery about 6 weeks earlier, couldn't exercise in that time after the surgery, and this would have been his first workout back in the gym. So I thought, yeah, this will probably be the first time that I run circles around him. He's always been in excellent physical shape. but the time has come when the young man overtakes his old man. Well, I wouldn't be telling you this story if you didn't suspect that perhaps that's not the way it went. In fact, that isn't the way it went. In fact, it was quite embarrassing. I did not run circles around anybody. He ran circles around me, and in fact, he demonstrated to me just how out of shape I actually was. I had virtually no stamina or endurance, no flexibility whatsoever, and certainly no strength. And after that experience, I thought to myself, you know what? This is inexcusable. This is unacceptable. This is intolerable. There's no good reason for a 36-year-old man in the prime of his life to not be able to even keep up with his 64-year-old father. I don't care how good a shape that he's in. There's no reason for me not to live up to that potential that I have in me. And I said to myself, this is just not right. There's no excuse for it. And so I made a decision. On that cruise ship, I got on my phone and I ordered through Amazon something called P90X, which was an exercise program that you could get on DVDs. It's a very difficult one, but it's one that I chose because I knew people who had done it, and they had gotten tremendous results and gotten to great physical shape. So I ordered it, and it was waiting for me when I got back. Now, before I go on, I just need to ask you the question, have you ever been in a situation where you have found something inexcusable or unacceptable or even intolerable? Maybe it's just as mundane or trivial as waking up one Saturday or Sunday morning and you look around your house and you look at the clutter and you look at the mess and you think to yourself, you know what? I am a grown adult. There is no reason for me to be living in this kind of condition. This is just intolerable, right? And so you get up and you start cleaning and decluttering, and you load up your car 2 or 3 times with appliances and clothes and all kinds of junk from your house, and you go and you drop it off, and then you pick up a few cans of paint on the way back, and you decide that you're not just going to clean your house, that you're going to redecorate it completely. Or maybe it's a job. Maybe you've had a job, and maybe you've had it for years, and it just gives you no purpose and no meaning in your life. And even though they pay you good money, they don't pay you enough to just suck the hours out of your life day after day after day. And one day, you say, you know what, this is inexcusable. This is unacceptable. This is intolerable. I don't care if I have to take a job that pays less money. I just can't do this anymore. And so you brush up that resume, and you consider even getting another degree. You're willing to do what it takes to get out of that situation into the life that you deserve. Maybe it's the world, and there's plenty to look at in the world and to find intolerable. And maybe you see news reports about yet another young black man has been pulled over in a traffic stop and shot unnecessarily and maybe even killed. Or maybe you see a story about a young child that's been abducted and murdered for no other reason than he is white. Or maybe you see a story about a teenager who's gay or transgendered who has been bullied so hard for their entire life that they finally are driven to suicide. Maybe you look at the division, all of the hate and the vitriol and the bickering and the bitterness and the cynicism that you see in our society, and you say, you know what? This is inexcusable. There's no reason for this. This is unacceptable in an advanced society. We're not at war with anyone right now. There's no reason for us not to be civil to one another, and yet we are falling apart at the seams. This is intolerable. Or maybe it's the church. Maybe it's the church. Before any of this started, for years, there had been something bubbling deep down inside of me. I don't know about you. I've talked many times about, how the church is in decline. And I've gone over this before. I'm not going to go over too much anymore. But I just got to tell you that even though I've seen how the numbers are in decline and the worship has dropped off in so many congregations around North America at least, and the money's drying up and the people are getting older and dying, and there's not a younger generation to come in to replace them. And even though I know on one level that the numbers aren't everything, that the attendance numbers and the membership numbers and the money isn't everything, that it often points to something else. And that something else is disturbing. That something else is just inexcusable, unacceptable, and in my mind, intolerable. And what that is, it's taken me some time to kind of figure out what it was. But the more that I meditate and think upon it, the more that it's come to my attention, at least, that I think that what it is that we live in a world that needs the gospel more than it has ever needed it before. We live in a world that is so fractured and so full of pain and so full of hopelessness. And at the same time that we live in this kind of world, we as disciples of Jesus, we who have been baptized in the life and death and resurrection of Christ, we who believe this gospel have precisely the message that the world needs. We have precisely the power, precisely the hope, precisely the love that God has given us, that has commissioned us to give to the world, that can heal all of the broken places. We live in a world that has never needed Jesus more than it needs it right now, and we are the ones who represent the hands and the feet of the Messiah. That's the inexcusable, that's the unacceptable, that's the intolerable part that disturbs me so very much. In the text that we heard this morning, the second installment of this new sermon series called Through the Wilderness. And the reason that we're calling it Through the Wilderness is because I want to remind you that if we can call this pandemic season of isolation and distance, this season that we're in right now that's so uncomfortable, a wilderness, then I want to remind you that we're going through it. We're not here to stay. God has not brought us into the wilderness to wither and die. And God has not brought us into the wilderness so that we can just turn around and go back from where we came. No. We're going through the wilderness. In the second installment of this sermon series, in the text that we heard from Exodus 3, verses 7 through 12, we see God who has appeared to Moses in a bush that was on fire and not consumed. We see God tell Moses what God has seen. And God says, I have seen the misery of my people. I have heard their cries, and I have decided to come down. You see, God's people have been in slavery in Egypt for 4 centuries, and they have been oppressed, they have been miserable, they have been crying out to God. They have found their situation intolerable. And the beautiful thing is, the thing that should make all of us stop and have our jaws drop to the floor and our knees hit the floor with awe, is that we have a God, we serve a God who sees what we find intolerable and it becomes intolerable for God. In other words, we experience misery and God's heart breaks. We are going through pain and we cry out, and God makes it his cause. And God comes down and commissions Moses to go to Pharaoh and to demand that the people be set free. And through the wonders of God, they will be led out of Egypt and out of slavery. They will go through the Red Sea, onto the mountain of God where they will worship, and then on to the promised land. God makes a promise to Moses that he will bring the people, just as he has promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he will bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of plenty and prosperity, a land of peace. But in order to get them there, in order to fulfill the promise, God is going to take them out of Egypt and through the wilderness. Now, the reason that I was willing to suffer the way that I did yesterday, and quite frankly this morning, I got up and I did the same thing, if you can believe that, and I'll probably do it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. The reason that I was willing to go through that kind of pain is because when I got home and I saw that P90X workout program, and I put the DVDs in, and after the first couple of weeks of novelty, I discovered that these were very, very difficult workouts. And I came face to face with the reality that if my situation was so intolerable, then the question is, am I willing to endure an uncomfortable situation and a temporary pain in order to change an intolerable situation? Am I willing to endure pain today to make a better tomorrow? Am I willing to endure discomfort today to fulfill potential that I know is inside of me? And so because I came face to face with that decision, and I realized that in order for me to reach the promise of my potential, to be in good physical shape, to be in good health, to be able to at least keep up with my old man in the gym, then I would have to be willing to undergo pain. And that pain was not pain for pain's sake. It wasn't suffering for suffering's sake. It was suffering for a purpose. It was a suffering that would prepare me to be the person that I could be. And I know the way the physiology works when you exercise in a gym and you lift weights. What you're doing is you're tearing the muscle fibers at the cellular level. And then what happens is you rest and you eat well, and the muscle fibers grow back, and they grow back stronger. And then you can add more weight, and as you add more weight, they break apart, and then they get back, they break apart, and then they grow back stronger, and you can lift more and more and more weight, and you can increase your strength, your flexibility, your endurance, and your stamina. That's the way it works. You see, the reason that the people had to go through the wilderness in the book of Exodus is because God had made them a promise of a land for which they were not yet prepared. You can't take a people who have been enslaved for 400 years and place them in the promised land. Number one, because there were already people there. Don't you understand? The people of Israel had some external enemies that they needed to face before they could go into the promised land. And there's no way they would be able to face these people if they had not been prepared for that kind of confrontation. So God takes them through the wilderness and hardens them and shapes them and strengthens them. And they also have an internal enemy that they have to face, because after all, they have the mentality and they have the sociology of a people who have been oppressed for all of that time. And they have to break out of that mentality, and they have to break out of those social structures, and they have to reorganize themselves around the providence of God. They have to learn how to trust God through thick and thin. They have to learn how to be reliant upon the promise and the power of God in order to get through. And that just takes time. It takes time the same way that somebody trying to get good health and get good fitness has to spend some time in the gym, lifting weights, running, doing things that are uncomfortable. God takes them through the wilderness so that they can be prepared. And even though it's going to be uncomfortable, and even though times it's going to be downright painful, because the situation they came from is so intolerable, they're willing to endure what they have to endure now so that the promise can become true. All right, come a little bit closer with me here. I think that the pandemic that we're in right now, this wilderness that we are all enduring, although it hurts, and although there is suffering, and although the word uncomfortable is woefully inadequate to describe what we're all experiencing right now, I don't think it's suffering in vain. I don't think it's pain without a purpose. I think that God has heard the cries of our souls, that God has recognized that we as the people of God have looked at this world and recognized that the church has not been able to do its job. And it breaks our hearts that we live in a world that is broken as it is, and that we have the answer and not have been able to put these two things together. That we have not been able to take the healing that is possible in the power of hope that has been given to us by the virtue of God's love and place it precisely in the places that it's needed. And because God has heard our cries, and because God has seen that we have found this intolerable, it has become intolerable for God. And so, people of God, this is what I believe. I believe that we are being prepared. I believe that we are being strengthened. I believe that we are being sharpened. And I believe that the pain that we are enduring right now is going to make us a better people, make us better Christians, make us more faithful, make us trust God more, make us work harder, make us preach more effectively, make us study deeper, make us connect to God more, make us focus deeper on the grace and goodness of God. That's what I believe we're here for. Let me tell you, when I got done exercising and I got done going through that program, and I was able to join my dad in the gym on another cruise that we had a couple of years later, it was a pretty nice feeling to be able to at least keep up with my old man. But let me tell you, the reason that I exercise today, and the reason that I'll exercise tomorrow, and the reason that I'm going to keep on staying on top of the potential that God has given me to stay in good physical shape is not so that I can keep up with my dad. It's so that I can be there for my children And I realized the reason that he does what he does is not that so he can beat his son in the gym, but rather so that he can see his son and his grandchildren and maybe even his great-grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. And I got to tell you, one of those 15 people that I was with yesterday when I was out there running and hurting and sweating and feeling like I was going to die was my own daughter. And I was so grateful to be able to suffer alongside her, to show her that she has what's inside of her, that she can do what it takes to make the potential that is inside of her come out. In other words, I was so proud to be able to show her that if you're willing to endure a little pain, then the promises can come true, the potential can be fulfilled, and God's call can come to fruition. I believe that we can make this through, and we can make this through stronger. Now, you don't have to see it the way that I see it. You can think of this as a punishment. You can think of this as unfair. You can think of yourself as a victim in all of this. I choose to think that God is bringing us to something greater, and before that promise can come true, before we can leave the land of the intolerable, then we need to be strengthened in the process. Thank God for this journey that we are making through the wilderness. Amen.